I first noticed something was off when I came home from work and found a 6-foot cedar fence slicing straight through the middle of my vegetable garden like it had been dropped from the sky. My tomato plants were crushed. My irrigation lines were cut clean in half. And someone had the audacity to zip tie a laminated sign onto one of the posts. Private HOA property, do not enter. Violators will be prosecuted. I stood there in my driveway, keys still in hand, trying to process what I was looking at. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who yells or throws a fit. But I've been dealing with the Briar Glen HOA for 3 years now. And this was the cherry on top of their long history of dumb power trips. I walked over to the fence, peeled the sign off, and tossed it onto my porch. About 30 seconds later, right on cue, she came marching down the sidewalk like she owned the zip code. Elaine Dobbins, HOA president, late 50s, overly tanned, wore cardigans like uniforms, and meaner than a wet badger. "You're trespassing," she barked at me before I even said a word. I blinked. "On my own property?" She pointed at the fence like it was the final word of God. "That land belongs to the HOA now. Your garden extended beyond your property line. It's been encroaching on common space for 2 years. We voted to reclaim it." I stared at her, stunned. "You voted? You don't get to just vote away private property." "We followed procedure," she said, arms folded across her clipboard. "You'll be receiving an invoice for the materials and labor." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "You're going to charge me for building a fence on my garden?" "On our land," she corrected, like she was talking to a 5-year-old. "You were warned before." "No, Elaine," I said calmly. "I was not. There was no warning, no notice, and no survey." She narrowed her eyes. "Check your mailbox." That night I did. Nothing. Just a newsletter about upcoming pet leash enforcement and a recipe for lemon bars. No warning. No survey. Nothing. So I did what any sensible man would do when someone just builds a fence through his heirloom tomatoes. I pulled out my property deed and called the county records office. And that's when I found the crack in their armor. See, the strip of land behind my backyard, the one they claimed was common HOA space? It was part of an abandoned parcel the original developer never finished transferring to the HOA. The land was technically owned by a defunct LLC that dissolved 5 years ago. The county still had it listed as unclaimed development land. I blinked at the clerk. "Wait. So nobody owns it?" She shrugged. "It's in limbo. Can I buy it?" I asked. "Sure. You'll need to file an application, pay the back taxes, and send notice to any adjacent property holders. If no one objects, it's yours." I filed everything within 48 hours, sent the certified notices, paid the taxes just under $2,000, and waited the required 30-day period. Elaine didn't object. No one did. Why? Because she didn't read the notice. I found out later she thought it was a solicitation and tossed it in the trash like junk mail. So, on the 31st day, the county clerk handed me a stamped certificate. I now owned the land the HOA had just built their shiny new fence on. I waited exactly 1 week. Then I put up a sign. "Private property, no trespassing." Elaine came knocking the next morning, red-faced and practically vibrating. "You can't do this," she snapped, waving a printed-out HOA charter in my face. "I already did," I said, sipping my coffee. "You're stealing from the community." "Funny," I said. "You didn't seem too concerned about stealing from me when you built that fence. We had a vote, and the vote was based on a lie." I cut in. "You told everyone the HOA owned that land. You didn't even bother to check the county records." She blinked hard, like the thought had never occurred to her. "I own the parcel now, legally, and I'm thinking of reselling it." She scoffed. "To who?" "No one wants a 20-foot wide strip of dirt." I smiled. "Actually, I got an offer yesterday. The guy wants to build a private RV parking pad. Says he'll pay 30 grand cash." Elaine looked like she just swallowed a lemon whole. "You're bluffing. Want to see the contract?" She stomped off, muttering something about lawyers. But I wasn't bluffing. A local contractor named Wes had already seen the listing I posted online and jumped on it. He had a small fleet of work vans he needed to park somewhere close to his jobs. HOA bylaws didn't allow commercial vehicles in driveways but private land not under HOA control? That was fair game. Within 10 days, I had the cash in the bank and Wes had a work permit from the city. Elaine tried everything. She called an emergency HOA meeting. She sent out angry letters. She even tried to claim my property was in violation of neighborhood aesthetics. But it wasn't in the HOA anymore. And that drove her absolutely insane. Then came the best part. While reviewing the parcel transfer documents, I noticed something odd. The HOA had been collecting dues based on a total acreage that included the abandoned parcel for years. That meant they'd been overcharging homeowners. When I brought it up to my neighbor, a retired accountant named Barry, he got curious. He ran the numbers, then brought them to the county. What followed was an audit. And once the county got involved, things unraveled fast. Real fast. Apparently, Elaine had been using the inflated dues to pad a maintenance budget that didn't exist. She'd authorized payments to her nephew's landscaping company for work that was never done. Fake invoices. Fake receipts. The fence they built over my garden? It wasn't even approved by the city. No permit. No inspection. The city fined the HOA $6,000. But that was just the beginning. I didn't hear a word from Elaine for nearly 2 weeks after the audit began. No surprise there. She had a habit of vanishing whenever real consequences came knocking. During that time, the new owner Wes wasted no time transforming the narrow plot. He laid down gravel, installed motion lights, even got a prefabricated carport craned in on a Saturday morning. The sound of steel beams clinking into place echoed through the neighborhood like a Liberty Bell. By Monday, 3 branded work vans were parked neatly under the structure, each with a fresh city sticker on the windshield and a permit number taped to the dashboard. Wes had followed every rule to the letter: city ordinances, zoning codes, even the environmental runoff requirements. He wasn't just covering his bases. He was daring anyone to challenge him. Barry, the retired accountant, and I watched from lawn chairs on my back porch as Wes sealed the edge of the lot with a chain-link gate and keypad lock. He waved when he saw us and held up a thermos like it was a toast. "Guy moves fast," Barry said, adjusting the sun visor on his baseball cap. "Faster than the county, that's for sure." "He likes to make things permanent," I replied. "Said he's already got a 5-year commercial insurance policy lined up." Barry chuckled. "Elaine's gonna try to light herself on fire when she finds out." That night, I got another kind of visitor. It was nearly 9 p.m. when I heard the knock, slow and deliberate, like someone trying not to wake a baby. I opened the door to find a man I didn't recognize standing under the porch light, holding a clipboard and adjusting wire-rimmed glasses that didn't seem to fit his face. "Mr. Trent?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm Douglas Wren, legal counsel for the Briar Glen Homeowners Association." His voice was flat, but his posture was loaded with tension, like he was trying to contain something. "I'd like to discuss recent developments regarding parcel lot C4. "I don't own it anymore," I said. "I'm aware," he replied, flipping a page. "But the circumstances under which it was acquired and subsequently sold are being reviewed. There's concern that procedural errors occurred." "Concern from whom?" "The board. Specifically from Mrs. Dobbins." "So Elaine sent you?" He hesitated. "The board retained me." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You're standing on private property right now. You want to keep talking, you're welcome to stand on the sidewalk." He blinked, then stepped back without protest. "We'd like to propose a resolution," he said, once his shoes hit concrete. "The association is prepared to offer a full refund of the taxes you paid to acquire the parcel in exchange for terminating the sale and reverting the lot back to common ownership." "No." "You don't want to hear the terms?" "I just did. And the answer's still no." He adjusted the glasses again. "You should know the HOA is preparing to file for declaratory relief. They intend to challenge the validity of the acquisition and the subsequent sale." "They can file whatever they want," I said. "But unless you've got a time machine, the county's not going to overturn a legal transfer that passed the objection period without dispute. You exploited a loophole. I followed the law. If your client didn't understand the process, that's not my problem." He tucked the clipboard under his arm. "Then I hope you're prepared for litigation. I hope you're prepared to lose it." He didn't argue, just turned and walked off into the dark like a man who already knew how his story ended. The next day, the HOA's website went offline. Not crashed, gone. A neighbor named Marcy told me she tried to log in to pay her quarterly dues and got a 404 error. By noon, word had spread that the HOA treasurer had resigned. Apparently, She'd been unaware that Elaine had signed off on payments that were now under investigation by both the county and a private firm hired by the board's remaining members. That night, I received an envelope hand-delivered by a teenager I didn't recognize. No return address, just my name in block letters. Inside was a single typed page with a header, Notice of Special Meeting Emergency Session. The board had scheduled a closed-door meeting at the community center for the next evening. The wording was vague, but the phrase regarding the status of HOA leadership and financial oversight stood out in bold. I wasn't invited, not technically a board member, after all, but Barry was. And Barry had no intention of keeping what he heard to himself. He showed up at my place an hour after the meeting ended, still wearing his good blazer and holding a folder like it was a loaded weapon. "They're dumping her," he said. "Elaine. Effective immediately." The vote was unanimous. Even her 2 pet members flipped on her. What about the lawyer? Gone. Turns out he was working pro bono. She never got board approval to hire him. He was just a friend of her husband's. He opened the folder and handed me a copy of the meeting minutes. At the bottom, in tidy cursive, was a motion to initiate a third-party audit of all HOA financial transactions for the last 4 years. Approved. 6-0. "She's contesting it," Barry added, threatening to sue the board for defamation. "She might want to call her own lawyer this time," I said. But Elaine wasn't done. 3 days later, Wes got a visit from a city inspector. Not a random drop in, a full-on compliance inspection complete with clipboard photos and tape measures. Wes called me right after. "They're claiming I violated stormwater runoff codes," he said. "My engineer submitted the drainage plan with the permit. Everything's been approved." "Did the inspector say who filed the complaint?" "Anonymous. But he said it was submitted by someone who claimed to represent a homeowners association." I didn't need to guess. Wes wasn't rattled, though. He sent a copy of his permit packet straight to the planning office. The next morning, the complaint was officially dismissed as baseless. That's when I decided to go on offense. I filed a request with the city clerk's office for all HOA correspondence over the last 2 years that mentioned my address. Since the HOA had acted as a quasi-public entity, those emails were subject to disclosure under the state's sunshine laws. It took a week to process, but when I got the files, I couldn't believe what I was reading. Dozens of emails from Elaine to board members, many of them sent in the middle of the night, discussing ways to reclaim private lots, enforce fines without hearings, and quietly alter the neighborhood map to reflect her vision for the community. One thread was particularly damning. It included a scanned map she'd drawn by hand, with red excess over certain properties. Mine included, labeled "Obstructions to Uniformity." I printed it, every page. Then I put together a packet and handed it to Barry. He brought it to the next open board meeting and requested to speak during public comment. "I'd like to submit this evidence," he said, laying the papers flat on the table. "It contains internal emails from the former president showing what I'd describe as deliberate targeting of homeowners and manipulation of official records." The room went dead silent. One of the new board members, a woman named Teresa who used to teach civics at the local high school, turned pale as she flipped through the stack. "I move to refer this to legal counsel," she said. Immediately, the board approved it on the spot. Elaine didn't show her face again after that. Her house went dark for a week. Then a for sale sign appeared on the lawn. No price, just a realtor's number and a motivated seller tag. Wes's vans never left their pad. In fact, he added a tool shed and a security camera that fed straight to his phone. The HOA had no say in it. They didn't even own the sidewalk beside it. And me? I bought a new tiller and started a second garden, this one right up against the back of my fence, where the tomatoes could get full sun without risk of reclamation. Funny thing is, I got more compliments on that garden than anything I'd ever planted before. Neighbors I'd never spoken to dropped by to ask about soil pH or what kind of mulch I used. A few even asked how they could look up old parcel maps just to see where their property lines really ended. Turns out, once you push back on a bully and win, people start realizing they can do the same. Wes installed a motion sensor at the corner of the lot that triggered a polite but firm audio reminder: "You are now entering private property. Authorized vehicles only." It startled the mailman the first time, but after that it became part of the neighborhood's background rhythm, along with the soft hum of Wes's solar floodlights that kept the strip illuminated all night. The HOA's influence shrank fast. Without Elaine's grip on the board and her unofficial enforcers resigning one after another, the whole operation lost its teeth. Rules that had once been wielded like weapons were now under scrutiny, and the board scrambled to rewrite outdated bylaws to prevent another scandal from erupting. But not everyone was thrilled. It started with a man named Curtis, a former board member who'd kept quiet during Elaine's reign but had clearly enjoyed the perks. He lived 2 houses down from mine and had a lawn so over-manicured it looked synthetic. He'd always been cordial, but now he watched me with the kind of expression a chess player reserves for someone who just flipped the board and walked off with the queen. When I passed him one morning while walking my dog, he didn't say hello. He just stood at the edge of his driveway, arms folded, watching me the way a hawk watches a field mouse. "You've stirred up a lot," he said finally. I stopped but didn't approach. "Things needed stirring," I replied. "You think this neighborhood's better off with RVs parked in back lots, and people questioning the board's every move? I think it's better off without people being fined for planting the wrong kind of tulips." Curtis didn't flinch. "There's a reason we had order. This place didn't maintain its value by accident. People maintain homes, not rules." He didn't say another word but turned sharply and walked back inside, slamming his door hard enough to rattle the decorative eagle nailed to his front gable. Later that week, a new issue surfaced. Wes called me again, but this time his voice was low and deliberate. "Someone's been leaving notes on my van windshields. No return address. Just typed messages about disrupting harmony and commercial encroachment." I met him at the lot that afternoon. He handed me one of the notes. It was printed on cheap white paper, the message center aligned in 12-point Arial like it had come from a flyer template. "You think it's Curtis?" "I don't know," Wes said. "But whoever it is waited until the cameras faced the other way." I checked the footage. Nothing. I looked around the lot. The gravel was undisturbed. No tire tracks or footprints. The only access was through the keypad gate or by hopping the short retaining wall from the sidewalk. "I'll install a second camera," I said. "One covering the perimeter. I've got a spare from the old greenhouse." Wes nodded. "Appreciate it. I'm not rattled. Just don't want this escalating." The next morning, the camera caught someone. It wasn't Curtis. It was a teenage girl, probably no more than 16, wearing a hoodie with the local high school's mascot on it and sneakers that lit up faintly as she walked. She darted up to the lot just after midnight, placed one of the notes under a wiper blade, then sprinted off. We couldn't see her face, but the hoodie had a name embroidered on the sleeve. S. Dobbins. Elaine had a granddaughter. Wes didn't want to press charges, but he did report the incident to the city's code enforcement office, just to get it on paper. Barry, ever the archivist, added a printed screenshot to the folder he'd started during the audit. He labeled it Post-Elaine Disruption, Phase 1. Meanwhile, the audit's results were finally published. 326 pages of itemized transactions, board meeting summaries, and a detailed list of irregularities. Elaine had authorized over $20,000 in unauthorized landscaping consultations, most of which were paid to a shell company registered under her sister-in-law's maiden name. She'd also rerouted HOA funds to cover the cost of a personal home remodeling project, disguising it as community clubhouse repairs despite the fact that the clubhouse hadn't existed since 2012. When the original developer's trailer was removed, the board held a town hall to discuss the findings. This time it was standing room only. Teresa, the civics teacher turned board president, stood at a podium in the middle school gymnasium, flanked by 2 of the newer board members who joined after Elaine's ousting. "We are here tonight to restore transparency," she began, "and to begin the process of amending the bylaws that allowed unchecked authority to flourish under a single individual." Curtis sat in the second row, arms crossed, jaw tight. When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand. "Will criminal charges be pursued?" Teresa didn't hesitate. "We've handed everything over to the district attorney's office. Our job is to fix the hole in the boat. The prosecutors will decide how to deal with the ones who drilled it." Applause broke out, not wild, but steady and deliberate. After the meeting, Barry and I stood by the bleachers while neighbors came over to shake our hands. "I never liked that woman," one whispered. "But I didn't think I could do anything about it." "You did plenty," Barry replied, patting her shoulder. "You showed up." A few days later, I got a letter from the county tax assessor. Because of the subdivision's audit and the discovery of misrepresented property boundaries, several parcels were being re-evaluated for tax adjustments. Mine included. Instead of an increase, I got a refund. $732. Apparently, Elaine's phantom common space had artificially inflated assessments for years. Now that the map was corrected, the county had some fixing to do. I used the refund to install a new greenhouse, this one made of tempered glass with a locking door and solar vents. It stood right where the old garden had been before the fence, before the fight, before the land grab. Neighbors stopped by often, curious about the new structure. One afternoon, while I was adjusting a shelf inside, a woman about my age walked up to the fence and waved. "I'm Erin," she said. "Just moved into the Dobbins house." I slid the door open. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, stepping out. She looked around. "People keep telling me stories. About the last owner. Something about a fence and a lawsuit." I laughed once. "Yeah. It was a weird year." "I read the audit," she said. "I'm a paralegal. Couldn't help myself." "So you know what you're walking into." "Honestly," she smiled. "I think it's better now." I nodded. "It is." She pointed at the greenhouse. "You selling any of those tomatoes?" "Not officially," I said. "But I've been known to trade for baked goods." She laughed and walked off, promising to return with banana bread. Later that week, the board posted a new amendment proposal, term limits for all officers, mandatory audits every 2 years, and a clause requiring resident approval for any land use changes. It passed with 94%. The fence was gone. Elaine was gone. The land was no longer a pawn in someone's power game. And the only thing growing in the lot now was community. The first sign that the neighborhood had truly changed wasn't the audit or even Elaine's departure. It was the sound of kids riding scooters down the sidewalks again, laughing as they weaved between mailboxes and chalk drawings. For the first time since I moved in, parents didn't look over their shoulders when their children set up lemonade stands or taped flyers to light posts. The invisible tension that had always hovered just under the surface was gone, evaporated like morning fog. But as peace settled in, a new issue began quietly bubbling up, not from the board, not from the remaining holdouts loyal to Elaine, but from a real estate firm sniffing around the edges of the subdivision. It started when a man in a tailored navy suit knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Carter Langley, a regional acquisitions manager for a development company out of the next county over. I recognized the company name from a billboard near the interstate, something about elevated living and modern luxury estates. He didn't waste time on small talk. "I'm here because your neighborhood's shifting. Lots of turnover, revised zoning, and an HOA with a weakened structure. It's prime for a reinvention." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "So, what? You want to bulldoze it and start over?" "Not quite. We specialize in partial redevelopments. Upgrades. Strategic additions. We've already spoken with 5 homeowners on the northern edge. They're considering selling." I didn't reply. He continued. "We're looking at acquiring a contiguous stretch of properties to develop a private access road. That gravel lot you sold? It happens to be dead center in our proposed entrance plan. Then I guess you'll be calling Wes." "We did." "He wasn't interested." "Then why are you here?" He smiled faintly. "Because you're the reason he's there. And from what I've heard, you've got a knack for seeing things 3 steps ahead." I gave no reaction, but my mind was already turning over possibilities. Langley pulled out a glossy folder and handed it to me. It was full of renderings, slick digital mock-ups of cul-de-sacs with geometric landscaping, smart homes with angular rooftops, private gyms, and uniform fencing. It looked like a tech campus disguised as a suburb. "We're prepared to offer the HOA a generous infrastructure package if they cooperate. New sidewalks, security gates, landscaping. All at our expense." "The HOA doesn't own the land you need," I said. "Not all of it. But they're the gatekeepers. And if they play ball, we'd like you on our advisory team." That caught me off guard. "Why would you want me involved?" "Because you know where the landmines are buried. And you're not afraid to step on one if it means exposing the wiring." I handed the folder back to him. "Not interested." He nodded once, professionally, like he'd expected that answer. But he left the folder on my porch anyway. Later that week, I brought it to Barry. He took one look at the proposed elevations and whistled low. They want to surgically remove the character from this place. I don't think they care what they remove as long as it turns a profit. I barely finished the sentence when Teresa called. The board had received a formal proposal from Langley's firm complete with incentives, signing bonuses, and a promised revitalization grant. They were calling a vote in 10 days. That night I walked the neighborhood, not out of paranoia but to see who was still invested. I saw porch lights on, people grilling in their driveways, a boy practicing free throws against his garage door. I made mental notes of who waved and who glanced away like they'd already made up their minds. The next morning, I knocked on Wes's metal office door at the back of the lot. He was organizing toolboxes, grease on his forearms and a Bluetooth headset clipped to one ear. "They're trying to buy this place out from under everyone," I said. "I know. They called again yesterday. Offered to relocate me to a commercial unit across town. Rent-free for a year. You taking it?" He shook his head and handed me a cold bottle of water. "I didn't build this to flip it. I built it to anchor something." I nodded. "Then we need to make sure the rest of the neighborhood knows what's coming." Over the next week, Barry and I did what Elaine never could. We organized by listening instead of commanding. We knocked on doors not to demand compliance, but to ask questions. What did people value here? What did they fear losing? Turns out it wasn't just about property values. It was about belonging. About not being told what color to paint their door or how many guests could park on a holiday. At the emergency town hall, the crowd was larger than any previous meeting, even the one where Elaine had been ousted. Langley's team was there too, dressed in polished suits and armed with a slick presentation projected onto the gymnasium wall. When they finished, the room fell into a hush. Then Teresa stepped forward. "We've heard their offer. Now let's hear from someone who's actually lived with the consequences of unchecked control." She turned to me. I didn't have a speech, just a folder of documents and a few clear sentences. "They're offering us polished sidewalks, but they'll own the shadows we walk in. You think the HOA was bad under one person? Try negotiating with a boardroom that doesn't live here." Someone near the back stood up. A young father I'd only met once. "What happens if we say no? We keep the land ours. We keep decisions local. And we show them that this neighborhood isn't for sale." Another voice, an older woman in a wheelchair, asked what would stop them from buying homes one by one. Barry answered that before I could. "They can try. But if we put a clause in our bylaws requiring supermajority approval for any external development partnerships, they'll hit a brick wall." The vote wasn't immediate, but it was decisive. 82% opposed the redevelopment. Langley's team left without comment. A week later, a new sign went up near the entrance of the subdivision. Not one of those carved granite monstrosities, just a modest wooden one, painted by a local artist, that read, "Welcome to Briar Glen. Built by neighbors, not developers." And below that, etched into a smaller wooden plank, "No HOA president for life. No bulldozers without a fight." Curtis, surprisingly, was one of the first to compliment the sign. He didn't say much, just nodded at it as he walked his dog past my porch. "Not what I would have picked," he said. "But you're glad it's there," I replied. He didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. That fall, Wes hosted a community barbecue on the lot. He brought in a food truck, set up string lights, and let kids climb in and out of his vans like jungle gyms. Barry and Teresa built a pop-up booth to help residents understand the new bylaws. And someone brought a stereo that played old soul tracks well into the evening. When the sun dipped below the rooftops and the last of the burgers were gone, I stood at the edge of the lot and looked out across the neighborhood. It wasn't perfect. There were still cracks in sidewalks and disputes over where trash cans should be left out. But it was ours again. Not just in name but in practice. The fence was long gone. The land had changed hands. But what really mattered was what we built in its place, not a structure but a backbone. And that was something no charter, no developer, and no power-hungry president could ever build or tear down.